When will San Diego's public schools put an end to distance learning? A date is set, but a lot needs to go right for a return to campus. The state's power companies haven't seen anything like it. Past due bills now exceed $1 billion during the pandemic. And after years of debate, finally, a plan for San Diego's short-term rentals. What does this mean for our beach communities and beyond? I'm Amita Sharma, and the KPBS Roundtable starts now.
¿Qué onda, friends? In this episode of Port of Entry, we wanted to share the live event experience we hosted together last year as part of the World Design Experience with special guests Charles Glaubitz and Giancarlo Ruiz. You don't want to miss this two-part episode of our live event. Catch us wherever you get your podcasts. Nos vemos pronto.
Welcome to our discussion of the week's top stories. I'm Amita Sharma. Joining me on this remote edition of the KPBS Roundtable are Joe Hong, education reporter for KPBS News, Rob Nicoleski, who covers energy for the San Diego Union Tribune, and KPBS Metro reporter Andrew Bowen. Most San Diego students haven't seen the inside of a classroom in almost a year. During that time, some of them have struggled academically, grappled with isolation, and even fallen into depression. Parents have had to juggle work and teach their kids. That all may change soon. San Diego Unified says it will reopen campuses a few days a week starting April 12th. The announcement comes just days before a county-wide vaccination program for teachers is set to start. KPBS education reporter Joe Hong joins me to discuss how the reopening will work. Thanks for coming on the program, Joe.
Thanks for having me.
Well, let's just get right into this. San Diego Unified says it will reopen by offering a hybrid model, a blend of face-to-face instruction and online teaching. What are the specifics on how it will work?
Yeah, so right now the specifics are frankly a little unclear. Starting on Monday, the district is going to start surveying parents to get a sense of how many families are comfortable going on campus for this hybrid model. The district will still be offering a fully online sort of distance learning program. But once they complete the surveys, they'll be able to know, how, what their staffing is going to look like and how many teachers they're going to need. And then they'll be able to determine how many hours they'll be able to teach students on campus for.
Now, Joe, other districts in the county have been using this hybrid model for some time. Do you have any idea on how many kids in those districts are actually choosing to physically go to school?
Yeah, I don't really have an exact number, but to give you a sense, in the eastern part of the county, Grossmont Union High School District has been in a hybrid model since September, and they've been at 25% capacity. So if 25% of its enrollment, want to be on campus, that's theoretically thousands of students that are going to schools each day and learning in person with their teachers.
Now, San Diego's reopen date is April 12th. We've heard these start dates before. For schools to reopen, new infections have to drop below 7 cases per 100,000. Right now, I believe we're at about 15 per 100,000. How optimistic are school officials that the county can get there by April 12th?
I think they are pretty optimistic. I think at this point, almost a year into the pandemic, officials are very wary of sort of the yo-yo effect that we've seen in the past year, where schools are going to reopen. Oh, wait, no, they're not. So now with this very concrete reopening date, it's really communicating, I think, a sense of relative certainty about bringing students back to campuses.
Within days, the San Diego County Office of Education will offer COVID-19 vaccines to teachers. Will teachers be required to get the vaccine in order to return to work inside the classroom at San Diego Unified?
So teachers will be required to get the vaccine, but if they want to be on campus, but teachers cannot be mandated to get the vaccine to return to work. So there will always be a sort of a distance learning option for the teachers who might not feel comfortable getting the vaccine for any reason.
And Joe, how are teachers and parents reacting to the news of San Diego Unified's planned restart date?
Yeah, so I'm sure you know the topic of reopening schools has become very polarized in the past year, and with this big news this week, the reactions were just came from across the whole spectrum. Some teachers really applauded the district for prioritizing public health, for requiring teachers to get vaccinated before going onto campus, for requiring that the county go back into the red tier for COVID-19 cases before schools reopen. And then on the other side, you had parents who were angry, saying this could have happened months ago and this is too little, too late. So yeah, you really got reactions from across the board.
San Diego Unified also plans to offer summer school this year to make up for some of the learning loss during the pandemic. How will those sessions work, and will they be offered district-wide?
Yes, summer school will be offered to all students, and I'm not sure exactly how it's going to work, but yeah, a lot of the work is going to be figuring out how far students have fallen behind and making sure that they are caught up before the school year starts. But as of now, there aren't any real details yet. That still needs to be figured out.
Okay, you were saying a little bit earlier that some parents have said for a while now that distance learning needs to be improved. What are the improvements that they're looking for?
Yeah, so this brings up an important point. I think distance learning will be a part of public education even after schools reopen. And a lot of the complaints I've been hearing revolve around communication. Parents are having a hard time reaching teachers. Students are having a hard time getting their questions answered about assignments or class material. And I've been hearing a lot also about students who turn in assignments, but on the platform, it appears as like a missing assignment, and sort of getting those questions answered has been a real struggle for students and their families. So I think the communication issue is going to be key.
This is the first time we've seen the district put a date on a large-scale reopening plan. Does this indicate that district leaders and county health officials believe the peak of the pandemic is behind us?
Yeah, so like I said before, the issue of reopening schools has become extremely polarized and therefore kind of delicate. And I don't think district leaders or county officials would be supportive of this plan if they weren't optimistic. And they're very cautiously optimistic, and I think a lot of thought went into announcing this reopening date. So I do think that optimism is there, and I think it's a very calculated optimism.
I've been speaking with Joe Hong, education reporter for KPBS News. Thank you, Joe.
Thank you, Amitha.
COVID-19 economic relief is running on dual tracks. This week, California lawmakers passed a $7 billion package that will deliver cash payments to some households. At the national level, Congress is inching closer to passing its largest bill yet. Despite the improving medical situation, the financial need is still there. Union Tribune reporter Rob Nicoleski illustrated this in his latest story, detailing more than $1 billion in unpaid utility bills in California. He joins us this week on the Roundtable. Hello, Rob.
Good to see you, Amitha. How are you?
Good to be with you as well. I'm doing well. So, Rob, let's plunge right into it. Keeping the lights on is one of the most essential bills for any household, but you found that more than 3 million Californians are past due. Just how much money are we talking about here?
We're talking about a lot of money, $1.25 billion. So it's $1.25 billion. And when you break it down, it roughly breaks down along the same lines of the size of the utility. Pacific Gas and Electric, for example, is the largest utility in California. And of that $1.25 billion, they account for about half of it, $600 million. San Diego Gas and Electric is the smallest of the four big gas and electric utilities, and their portion of that is $145.3 million. So we're still talking about a lot of money when you spread that out over the, a little bit more than 1 million residential customers that San Diego Gas Electric has. And also I want to add real quickly, these numbers are just for residential customers. So these are average everyday Joes and Janes out there.
So is there any historical comparison to the amount of money due by customers? And what I mean is, during the Great Recession a decade ago, were delinquencies at this level?
That's a very good question. And a number of all the commissioners that are currently in the CPUC, the California Public Utilities Commission, were not around back then. So there really isn't a good point of reference, but I would presume that these numbers are pretty much off the chart. When you go back to 2008, 2009, it was more of a gradual situation. It was serious, but it was more gradual. And so I would presume that these numbers have been much more precipitous than they were, 12 or 13 years ago.
So, Rob, at the local level, you found nearly 1 in 4 SDG&E customers are behind on their bills. How is the utility responding to this?
Well, on an overall level, the CPUC has had a moratorium on disconnections, and San Diego Gas and Electric, at the very beginning of the shutdown regarding COVID last March, they also put a moratorium on disconnections for people who were not able to pay their bills. Also, at the same time, San Diego Gas and Electric waived late fees. That basically has been extended statewide, and then just this past month, the CPUC has extended that disconnection moratorium through June 30th. So there's been a little bit of help both on the local level and on the statewide level.
So clearly the state is taking this issue seriously. You quoted one of the state's public utility commissioners calling it, quote, extraordinarily frightening. What are their options right now?
Well, first, they did extend that moratorium through June 30th. The other thing that they also directed all the utilities to establish what they call an arrearage management plan. And that is a plan in which people who are behind on their bills, I think it's up to $500 or more behind on their bills, they can sign up for this plan. And if they're able to pay their bills on a monthly basis, they're able to pay them on time, they get a portion, 1/12 of that total amount reduced, forgiven. So those are some of the things that the state has been doing to try to give people a little bit of help during a very rough period.
So are there any other programs that customers might qualify for?
Yes, well, there's something called the CARE and FARA programs, and the CARE program is a California Alternate Rates for Energy program. FARA is a Family Electric Rates Assistance program. And the CARE program is available to customers who have a household income that is at or below specific income levels. For example, for a family of 4, it's $52,400, and you can qualify that. And that program can reduce bills by about 30 to 35%. Now, FARA is another program, very similar, but it's for people who are just slightly above that income level.
So what about the people who may not qualify for these programs? Is there any kind of repayment plan? How is SDG&E and other companies working with customers?
Well, one of the interesting things that came out of this CPUC data was that you would think that the people who are really behind on their bills would probably be disproportionately in CARE and FARA programs. But one of the things that the data show was that roughly the same amount of people, almost the same amount of people who were not enrolled in those CARE and FARA programs were behind on their bills by a month, 2 months, 3 months, up to 6 months. So one of the things that the Utilities Commission brought up, and also something that, in fairness, the utilities themselves individually have been trying to do, is try to get more and more people to sign up for CARE and FARA programs, because obviously there are a lot of people who are suffering out there, just judging by the numbers of the people who are not in those programs who are behind on their bills.
So is there any plan in place in terms of what happens after the moratorium expires, and for the people, again, who may not qualify for these programs? Do the power companies eat the loss?
That is a very good question, and that's something that someone from the Utilities Commission brought up, Ed Randolph, who's one of the heads of the Energy Division, and quoting from him, because that was a very good question that I think the average reader would have, and he said, quote, "Additionally, the uncollected bills by the utilities are generally passed on to other ratepayers." So That means if there's no plan in place to enable struggling households to manage those bills and keep them affordable, other ratepayers ultimately will bear some of that burden. Now, having said that, I think that there probably will be, because of the scope of this, I think there's going to be a political debate about whether or not the utilities should eat some of that, because utilities are guaranteed a guaranteed rate of return. And if this problem is as widespread and doesn't resolve itself, if we don't have a quote V-shaped recovery, I think that's something that's going to be a question of fairness, because if some ratepayers are able to pay their bills on time, and they may be physically strapped, but they are paying their bills on time, there does bring up an issue of fairness about whether they should pay a little bit more to make up for those who have not been able to.
How much pushback do you expect from those ratepayers should it come to that?
We're not really sure right now, because at this point, there's been no reckoning as far as how much those bills are going to come to, because right now the moratorium is in effect. And you asked earlier, what do they do after June 30th? The commission hasn't made up their mind yet. They haven't decided that yet, but I would presume that unless things get dramatically better between now and June 30th, I would think that the commission would very seriously consider extending the moratorium for 3 more months or 6 more months, possibly till the end of this year.
Okay, we're going to close it there. I've been speaking with Rob Nicoleski, energy reporter for the San Diego Union Tribune. Rob, thank you.
It's always a pleasure.
¿Qué onda, friends? In this edition of Port of Entry, we are telling the story of Charles and Giancarlo, two compadres who recently put together a graphic novel titled The Fracture. Along with this podcast episode, we are premiering Port of Entry Shorts, small video capsules of the stories we put together, and we have 2 to share. Catch us wherever you get your podcasts. Nos vemos pronto!
Take a stroll through just about any beach community and you'll see the calling cards of an expansive vacation rental market. Lockboxes decorating gates and window signs. The subset of our real estate market thrives on platforms like Airbnb and Vrbo. And until this week, San Diego's city leaders were either unwilling or unsuccessful in regulating a business that critics say is harming neighborhoods. KPBS Metro reporter Andrew Bowen is here to explain what happened and what comes next. Hello, Andrew.
Hi, Amitha. Thanks.
First off, it's not official yet, but this week's vote makes it all but a formality. What did the City Council decide, and what's next in this process?
Yeah, just to dive briefly into some of the details of this ordinance, the council approved 4 license types for short-term rentals. The first one would cover any type of listing that is rented out for fewer than 20 days per year. It could be a whole home rental, a condo, a shared room, or whatever. The second type covers home sharing for more than 20 days a year. So say you're renting out a spare bedroom, or you have a duplex and you're renting out the second unit. Both of those license types are unlimited. The third license type covers renting out an entire home for more than 20 days a year. And the fourth covers whole home rentals only in Mission Beach. And those second 2 types 3 and 4, will be capped. And the number of licenses available will be less than what we estimate as the number of listings that are actually on the market now. So we should see a reduction in the overall number of short-term rentals in San Diego. All of these licenses will come with fees that will cover more code enforcement. This is the city trying to crack down on noisy parties or bad actors, and you can lose your license if you're caught breaking the rules or failing to pay hotel taxes. As far as what's next, the council there has to be a second reading of this ordinance, and that, as you mentioned, is kind of a formality. And the council later this year is expected to finalize some of the administrative regulations that cover some of the finer details.
Now, there was only one vote against this proposal. District 1 Councilmember Joe LaCava. Why is he against it?
LaCava's district includes La Jolla, which is one of the main hotspots for short-term rentals, and his no vote was not a surprise, mainly given the fact that he was endorsed by Save San Diego Neighborhoods, which is the main group that opposes short-term rentals. He, in the meeting, sought to make some amendments to the ordinance. He wanted to freeze the number of licenses for whole home rentals at 1% of the current housing stock, and it would not allow, the number of licenses would not grow proportional to the growth in the city's housing supply. Council President Jen Campbell, who had brought this ordinance forward, didn't accept his amendments. I think LaCava probably knew that they wouldn't be accepted because they were pretty substantive changes from what she had put forward. So that gave him a pretty easy reason to say, no, I can't agree to this. But in general, I think he's just interested in making the regulations as strict as possible, and this compromise just didn't cut it for him.
And Andrew, even those who voted yes say more work needs to be done. Let's hear from Councilmember Monica Montgomery-Steppe.
With the understanding that we will revisit this, I'm going to put everyone on notice. I do not think the platform accountability measures that we have talked about here today have been even spelled out for myself. Like, I don't understand what the penalty would be with regard to the platform. I am going to vote yes, but I am going to continue to address that issue.
What is Councilmember Montgomery-Steppe getting at there? What still needs to be resolved?
Well, as I mentioned, the administrative regulations for this ordinance will be coming back to the council in the fall. And these are the finer details that are a bit more malleable than something that's written into the municipal code in the form of an ordinance. Things like more specific requirements on how to obtain a license, how to verify that you're the legitimate owner of this home or the legitimate tenant, details on noise restrictions and other quality of life impacts, other kind of rules that don't need to be written into the law per se. And just to make it clear what Montgomery-Steppe, when she was saying the platforms there, she's referring to Airbnb and Vrbo. She wants to hold them more accountable and make sure that they're holding up their end of the bargain and being good actors. In addition, thinking further into the future, the city does plan on evaluating the effectiveness of these regulations. And so I think she's also saying that as we look into the future and are these working as we intended them to, they could be tweaked in the future, and maybe she'll look at making them stricter.
This is one of the first big non-COVID issues tackled by the new Democratic supermajority. Is there any behind-the-scenes conflict or deal-making that you find interesting?
Well, short-term rentals have never been a strictly partisan issue. Thinking back just a few years, the most anti-Airbnb members of the city council were Sherry Leitner, a Democrat, and Lori Zapf, a Republican. And some of the most pro-Airbnb council members were, maybe a Democrat or a Republican. In this particular case, the ordinance passed 8-1, and the one Republican left on the council voted with the Democrats, and then the one no vote on this ordinance was a Democrat. So this issue has been, analyzing the politics here, I think this issue has been such a drain on the political discourse in San Diego for so many years. Another noteworthy thing is that the majority of the city council now is brand new. 5 council members were just inaugurated last December. And so I think that helped this ordinance. I think that a lot of them they don't have the baggage of having sat through all of these meetings before and having, had taken previous votes on this. But I think that a lot of these new council members just felt like this is an issue we need to settle. This is a decent compromise, and we're just going to say yes to it, to put it behind us so that we can focus on other issues.
Well, one of the faces of this issue at the city level is Council President Jennifer Campbell, whose district includes many of the beach communities at the heart of this. What is her view on short-term rentals?
Campbell was elected in 2018 as a strong skeptic of short-term rentals. She, at that time, supported a much more restrictive proposal. That ordinance passed, but then Airbnb and its peers funded a signature gathering campaign that would have forced a referendum. And the city council then had a choice. They could either put these regulations to a vote and, have to defend them against a very well-funded campaign, or they could rescind the regulations and try something later. They ended up rescinding them. And so what I think Council President Campbell learned from that experience was that unless you can get these platforms to sign on to the regulations, it's going to be very difficult to let them stick. So she evolved on this issue. And I think she has become much more amenable to allowing some kind of regulations and acknowledging that these are going to be a part of our city going forward. Many of her constituents see that as a betrayal, and they see these regulations as crafted by the special interests behind closed doors. She spent all this time reaching out to the community saying, we want your input on this issue, and then comes forward with a proposal that was not, they see as completely different than what they were asking for.
Andrew, you just did a story for KPBS on the recall effort against Council President Campbell. How much does a short-term rental issue factor into that story?
Well, it's really the main issue that's motivating that recall campaign. There are other issues. Council President Campbell supported lifting the 30-foot coastal height limit in the Midway district. Midway, of course, not being a coastal neighborhood by any stretch of the imagination, and many of the residents and property owners there begging for lifting the height limit so that they could have a shot at revitalizing what's kind of an armpit in San Diego. Another issue in the recall campaign is her decision to seek the position of council president over her colleague, Monica Montgomery Stepp, who many felt was more qualified for that position. People see her as too close to the police officers union, too close to SDG&E, as the city is trying to renegotiate a deal with that utility and get a better bargain with them. So I think that there are a lot of different issues motivating that recall campaign, but really central to it, and the first issue that kicked off the effort to recall her, is her support of these regulations for Airbnb. Now, it's worth noting most recall campaigns in California fail, or rather more fail than succeed. So it's a long shot, certainly, but there are a lot of people that feel very, very passionately that Campbell's bringing forward of these regulations was a betrayal of her constituents.
Well, we'll be touching base with you a lot more on this issue. I've been speaking with KPBS Metro reporter Andrew Bowen. Thank you, Andrew.
My pleasure, Amita.
That wraps up this week's edition of the KPBS Roundtable. I'd like to thank my guests, Andrew Bowen and Joe Hong from KPBS News, and Rob Nicoleski from the San Diego Union-Tribune. If you missed any part of our show, you can listen anytime on the KPBS Roundtable podcast. I'm Amitha Sharma. Thanks for listening, and join us next week on the Roundtable.
Now on The Finest, we examine an icon. Our Lady of Guadalupe has been a powerful symbol for 500 years, and artists have reimagined her as a source of resilience and pride. Listen now wherever you get your podcasts.